Good afternoon, good evening, morning, and welcome to Uplift, uplifting conversations that set your heart on fire. Today, we're going to talk about teenagers. I've been one, I'm sure you've been one. Come and join the show. G'day and welcome to Uplift. My name is Sarah Wade. I'm an art therapist, social media coach, and all-round amazing human. We've got another amazing human joining us from Calgary, Canada. As always, my co-host, Mr. Neil Thrussell. Welcome.
Hello, I'm really excited today because I think my parents should have actually taken and learned all about these conversations. They probably wouldn't have had so many issues with little old moi.
Goodness me, I can't imagine that. And joining us from Wagga Wagga in New South Wales, we've got the amazing and talented Miss Sally Lean. Thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for having me on the show, guys. What a thrill to be here.
Pleasure. Now, Sally has got an amazing history. She's spent 22 years in international schools helping people in other countries and has come back to Australia, which we warmly welcome. So I'd love you to sort of lean into that a little, if you wouldn't mind.
Sure. So actually, it's been a fascinating journey. I sort of look back and think, wow, how did that even happen? But and I've been on the journey. So yeah, I actually started this whole Asia thing started in middle school because the school that I went to in Melbourne, it was compulsory to learn Chinese. And the school was one of the pioneer schools in Australia that started teaching Chinese way back in like 1970 or something. So, yeah, the several private schools in Melbourne that started teaching Chinese in the 60s and early 70s because of the history of Chinese in Australia. So, yeah, Chinese came out to Australia not long, maybe 40, 50 years after European settlement of Australia. So there was in the gold rush, a little bit like how many of the Chinese ended up moving to California, same thing here. But when the Chinese stayed and became very much a strong part of our merchant class in Australia. So there's a huge history there. And a lot of people don't even realize, because they say, why would you learn Chinese? And of course, it was, in those days, in the early 1980s, but don't do the math on that, when I started learning Chinese. So it was, fast, and people are like, why? And really the question is, why not learn Chinese, especially given how, the prominent China is now on the world stage. But I asked my dad a few years ago, what on earth prompted you to think that it might be a good idea for me to learn Chinese? Because I actually selected the school because of that opportunity. And he said, well, just given the population, I thought it might be useful for your future. And he didn't realize that, nor did I at the time, that I'd really enjoy learning. And we moved away from the city when I was starting high school. So I couldn't continue, and I really missed learning languages. So I decided that even though during my teen years, I thought I might end up being a vet at one point. I wanted to be a veterinarian because I loved animals. But then I really thought about what did I want, and I liked the idea of travel and seeing some of the world. So I thought maybe if I do languages or, a language at university, that might, give me more options. So I decided to major in Chinese language, history and culture. And I did a sub-major in international politics, thinking that I might get into foreign affairs when I was finished, which didn't happen. Surprisingly enough, I got a teaching scholarship with my state government. And because of the Australian shift in foreign policy back in the day, in the 80s and 90s, to really focus on our own neighborhood in given that we're part of Southeast Asia. Instead of just holding hands with big brother America and, holding onto the apron strings of Mother England, we needed to really refocus our policy here in the Southeast Asian region, and looking at, obviously, in Asia and Southeast Asia is where the huge majority of the population of the world is based. So why not? We better start looking in our own backyard. And so, that's how my career actually got boosted quite quickly. When I started, I became a teacher, and started teaching Chinese. And I ended up getting early leadership opportunities because of this sort of promotion of Asian languages that was happening in the 90s from the from the Australian government. So and having had spent some time in China, spent a year first of all as part of my degree in the early 90s when it was just opening up, having lots of crazy adventures and things running around in China with several of my classmates from Australia. And then came back and finished university, did my teaching degree, and went in thinking, I'd probably just teach for a few years, finish my scholarship, agreement, and then get a real job. Quote.
Yeah. How'd that work out for you, that real job?
Well, I, as it happened, I really loved teaching. And in particular, I loved teaching Chinese because it was so different. I used to have a lot of kids who'd be like, oh, hey, miss, what are we got to learn this for? I'm never going there, those sort of, negative reactions. But over time, they really, I tried to help them to be able to just enjoy the experience, even if it wasn't their favorite thing or they had no intention of continuing on. Why not just enjoy and have a bit of fun while you have this opportunity to learn. So so that's how that all came. And so for many years I was able to tell people that I get paid to do what I love. So it was it's just beautiful, right? So I ended up moving overseas. Like, I heard about this thing called international schools. I was like, well, I hadn't heard of those before. Like, that sounds pretty cool. Bumped into a woman, or in fact, she was standing in front of me in the immigration line at Shanghai airport one time. And we just got chatting, and she said that she was working in an international school in Shanghai. And I sort of asked a few questions and thought, wow, what a cool idea. After teaching
22 years into it too. Wow.
Yeah, right. Well, 21, working, but, and plus the 1 year at university. So, who knew that would happen? I went for a couple of years thinking, oh, well, I'll go and see what this is like. And, and just never came back for a long time. Obviously, I come home regularly and see the family, but I was, just really loved it. And it just became, I don't know, it was a great adventure every day. You can imagine, and with this phase too, it was quite funny being a Chinese language teacher in China, and being in fact the head of the Chinese program in a number of schools in China. Parents would sort of walk in and go, "Oh, sorry," and close the door, and then come back a minute later going, "Are you Lin Lao Shu?" And I'd be like, "Yeah, that's me." The face didn't match the job, right?
Yeah.
One of my students, actually, I had a great class of students at one point in Beijing, and middle school kids. So they're sort of about, 12, 13, 14. And one of the kids came in and said they watched a James Bond movie over the weekend. And then he said, Lin La Shu, you're like a secret agent, Chinese language teacher. You're undercover. So they christened me 008, the undercover Chinese language teacher.
So you're 008, you're having fun, you're helping kids to expand their minds and to really just collaborate with other kids and potentially in other schools or other languages. What a brilliant thing to do for them. As someone whose face didn't match what people thought, did you find any hiccups that were along the way that were common when you came back to Australia to teach Chinese?
Well, I actually, I only did a small project last year for my state Department of Education, and it was an interesting outcome. trying to offer Chinese to rural kids. It was a little bit too far removed, I think, for their daily needs. It was really interesting. I know the benefits, of learning another language, and there's plenty of research about it. But it was just it was hard, and on the back of COVID as well. With yeah, it was kind of like an interesting situation. So I really haven't done much teaching back here, but I am interested in facilitating learning. So I'm starting to get involved in with some of the Chinese teaching groups here, and I'm going to be keynoting later in the year and things like that. So yeah, it's a really interesting situation. So for me, one of the things that I struggle with is having worked in one of the best schools in the world. I worked at Singapore American School for 6 years, and I started teaching in high school, and I retrained myself really. I mean, and had supportive colleagues to work with as well. But in learning how to teach for proficiency, and it really in learning about language proficiency and how language works and how we build our language skills, first of all, our mother tongue, and then, or native first language. And then secondly, in adding on a foreign language. So it really helped me to understand better how to build language skills for students. And language skills are actually also related to our development. So even in our first language, it's related to our age and stage of development. So, as we know, the young kiddos, it's sort of imprint period up to 7 years old, right? So, and they're also very imaginative and, have no, no understanding about, what's real and what's not. So, and so, Santa and the Easter Bunny and the Tooth Fairy and all those things are, eminently possible for them, and we'd have to keep an eye on them so that they don't try things like my younger brothers did, like jumping off the roof thinking that they might fly. Luckily, there was a pool underneath, but yeah. I'm sure there's plenty of parents that have had, headaches from these sort of imaginations that we have as young people. Yeah, so it's sort of language develops as we develop. So we start with small things, and younger children are not, they're very concrete with their thinking and with, what they talk about and that sort of thing. They don't have a sense of being abstract until they're just into their early teens, so that shifts, and their language development shifts with it when they can talk about things a bit more abstractly and think about things more abstractly. And so, yeah, go ahead.
This is a great segue, Sally. So you came back, and then you finally decided you're going to grow up and you're going to do something, and all of a sudden you're teaching teens, which perceived for many is the toughest combat job out there. Most people would sooner go to war than tangle with their teenage child, and you want to teach people and empower people to communicate with their teens, when I think a lot of parents just hope they don't kill themselves between their teen years, and then they outgrow it and become a decent human being at the far end. What in the world made you decide that you wanted to tackle teens?
Yeah, well, great point. I often say to parents, I actually don't have my own kids, which I think, in some ways makes it easier. And I also have, I can bring the focus. I'm not dealing with them at home myself, So when I work with my teen clients, they are my focus, which is really a great gift for me as well. But working with teens has been something I've always enjoyed, because of the opportunity to connect. You don't always connect with every single one of them deeply, but when they are able to connect with you and you can speak to them on their level, meet them where they are, then it really does open up a lot of possibility in terms of what they're willing to take on. They'll, you know, and as we all know from our own experiences at school, you'll follow and you'll learn more with a teacher that you connect with. You'll follow and you learn more from, you know, a coach or a mentor, or, you know, someone in your life that you're close with, or that you feel, you know, that you can rely on and trust them and be open with. So it's really important that we take that on. But what motivated me coming back to Australia, I came back during the pandemic, which was really interesting because I basically had to bust my way back into my own country because Australia was really shut down during the pandemic. So that was a very stressful and rather interesting experience that I hope I don't have to repeat in the future. But what my dad started needing a bit of extra help as he's getting older, he's aging. And
but we aren't. None of us here are aging.
No,
no.
No,
He's
that's
just an outlier.
Still a teenager.
Yep, absolutely. I don't know about everyone else, but I'm very young inside. But yeah, so I just decided that it was time to, you know, family first. So I came home. We lost mum a few years ago, so it was time to think about, all right, what am I going to do? And then I took 6 months off, which was lovely to have a little bit of a chance to relax and, you know, get my feet back on the ground and get myself repatriated in that sense, and go through all of the reverse culture shock and things that happened, which has ended up being slightly delayed because of lockdowns. But you know, yeah, not a problem. We could get to within our, not that they actually ended up making a 5-kilometer radius, but I was busy measuring, right? From home, we could get to Bunnings, which is a big hardware store here. So we could get all the things we needed to be doing renovations at home. You know, we could get to the grocery store, you know, and the liquor store. So we were all good. Like, it was fine. Like, happy to
tick, tick, tick.
just locked down, doing some things at home, having my time off, you know. It's like, oh my goodness, luckily. But yeah, not so pleasant for many others. But yeah, so
how was repatriating to all of the Aussie slang?
Well, as you can clearly hear, I've got my Australian accent back, but you know, when I was working overseas, the Brits would ask me if I was American, and the Americans would ask me if I was British, and I'd be like, no, you're all wrong. You know, I'm an Aussie. So, and even in China, funnily enough, I would often be asked if I'm Chinese. So, yeah, because there are minority peoples out in the West in particular that are of Russian sort of background, so they look very Turkic. And when I had longer hair, I really could have blended in. So, yeah, and because I spoke pretty good Chinese, so people would be like, "Are you Chinese?" I'd be like, "No." And you know, when I was a student back in the day, I used to tell them that I was, you know, from out west, and you know, so I could get local price instead of paying tourist price.
I love that.
Yeah. You know, and a lot of Singapore taxi drivers would be asking, like, you know, how come your Chinese is better than most Singaporeans? You know, because I have a nice northern academic sort of Chinese accent when I speak. So yeah, it's interesting to, you know, where being in a situation where you don't blend in with everybody on the street, and yet can be, you know, kind of going between. My Chinese friends thought for a long time, and one day one of them came in, that was a colleague that I was working with, comes rushing into the office. She goes, "I know what we can call you," because we would be talking about how Chinese people who spend a lot of time in Western countries like, you know, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, the US, England, are called bananas because they have sort of the, you know, Western, you know, culture, but then they're Asian skin. Well, then my Chinese friends christened me an egg. They said I'm white on the outside, but I have a yellow heart. So I thought that was exactly. And then I spent so long there. Now I'm just scrambled, you know, like all mixed up together. But yeah, so it was just one of the things that I loved about having, you know, the language was the access to a deeper access to people and to the culture than is available if you're only coming at it, you know, through English. So it was really amazing. And it's the same thing same thing but different. In all the work that I've done academically, one of the reasons why I decided, Neil, from your earlier question, to work with teens in terms of coaching. I started my coaching business last year, and I was working with adults, and building confidence and helping people who were interested in moving out of, say, full-time work and setting up their own business, as I have done. So it's, as we know, we sort of tend to coach on things that are familiar from our background, our strengths and things like that. So I was like, okay, well, that's cool, let's do that. And it was sort of starting to pick up. And then I got to Christmas last year, and I had a little bit of reflection time, as you sometimes do over Christmas, New Year. And I thought, you know what, I'm going to miss working with kids. And that is such a strength and such an amazing, almost 3 decades that I've spent, invested in working with kids and in teens, young. I've taught, from 4-year-old right through to 18-year-olds in high school, but, and obviously adults as well through teacher training. But I just really thought there's a lot of coaching available for adults. Everywhere you go now, you're seeing it scrolling on the internet, and there's, all of the big wigs like, Tony Robbins and co. And, and every adult has access to something, and quite easily, but not every, teenager has that available to them. So there's, and there's a lot of people out there who are coaching and not necessarily, well trained or doing it well, so it's just a real commitment of mine to bring everything that I've learned through my international school experience, in the 20 plus years, to what I'm doing now as a coach. Because, I love working with kids, that's one thing, but I have all of this amazing training and experience, and I've worked with some some really great people, so I just thought I need to distill everything that I've got, that I've been trained in, that the experiences that I have been given, on the wall behind me. I've got, my master's in education, but that's one thing, to have a master's in education leadership. But how can I distill that for teenagers? Because we tend to treat kiddos, particularly teenagers, they're in that sort of grey period. They're not adults yet. They're still underage. They're still, mostly usually under their parents' roof. They have to, do what they're told at school. They have to do what they're told at home. And yet they're trying to figure out who they are as young people as well. So their lives are now, but we treat it like their lives, and teachers teach them like their lives are, when you graduate from high school. And then they get to university. When you graduate from university, one day you'll have a job, with a nameplate on the door and a name card to give people. And it's like, no, their lives are now, not one day when they get a job, or graduate from something. So there's this sort of...
And that's such an old paradigm right now, because the teenagers are in such an influx of what they could do, because certain parents are still rooted in you have to get a job, and now you're having to deal with a teenager who sees opportunities where there wasn't before, like the internet or online, wherever. So you're having to I suspect you're having to have powerful conversations with the teen and the parent units at the same time, or at least separate, so that you can explain it in different ways because we all learn to communicate in different ways.
That's true. And the communication, really, it's the key to everything, isn't it? We want, and many parents notice, they lose that cute cuddliness that they have with their kids, and when they're sort of up to about 10, 11 years old, and then suddenly it's not so cool to be cute and cuddly with mum and dad. So there becomes this little bit of a distance, and they go from these kids who come home from school and tell you everything, this and that, and then they're coming home and you go, how was school? Good. What did you do today? Nothing. And they just become like monosyllabic, like, yeah, fine. But, that's the conversation with the teenager, the one-sided. So but there's skills, like communication is the skill, right? and we can learn that. And a lot of parents, a lot of parents are working. A lot of parents would be in the environments where we have meetings, we have norms, in meetings where we've set out our expectations. But who has actually actively created family norms? So they're created with their kids. There's a lot of parents who'll tell their kids what they expect, but it's not necessarily a two-way thing. So, how about sitting down and creating family norms with your kids where you have, parents get to say what they hope to see and what their expectations are. Kids also get to have a say in what that might look like, and co-creating the family norms, of behavior and expectations. Like, how cool would that be?
Keyword there, co-creating, hey? It's so empowering for that child and the parent. I love that you're helping to co-create for them. What is one of those things that often maybe they miss?
Totally.
That you're helping to connect the dots with.
That's right. And it's not like they suddenly turn 18 and they just can be ready to step out into the world and know how to do things. They still need that guidance. But if we start them earlier, having a sense of contribution and being able to, rather than just passively kind of in the back seat, literally, while the parents are driving, you're in the back seat, just follow along. If we allow them to take on, guided responsibility where, and given in small increments, as they, are able to take on responsibility and show that they're dealing with it well, and, able to build it up over time. Like it really does take a lot of intention. And, and the biggest thing, as we know, kids, it's not what we say that has the biggest impact. It's what we do. So the adults in the room, no matter who they are, if these things tend to get very much in the way of communication these days. It's sort of between us and them, So if parents are home, and yes, okay, often there's work to be done as well for parents as well as kids doing homework. But if we're scrolling and not being mindful of what we're actually, modeling, then you can't say to your kids, well, you shouldn't be spending so much time on your iPad, or you shouldn't be doing this, shouldn't be doing that. It's not your words that matter, it's the modeling. And we really need to be not just telling kids what they should be doing, it's modeling for them. And, Sarah, we used that word before, co-creating, what we can be doing and how that might look for each family, because there's different needs in different families. So what does that look like? And when do we have time? When do we, Sunday night might be by agreement, scroll and watch telly night, and have dinner on the couch or something on the sofa, who knows? But you know what I mean? Like it really, it might look different in all families, but how do we model that as well and be really mindful?
Yeah. One of my friends has got twins, and their family was a little bit out of control. They were having a hard time. The kids were not overly rebellious, but they were rebellious, and they chose to bring in family time on Sunday nights, and you were home Sunday night no matter what. And there was at the dinner table, there was no cell phones. And it started just with a family dinner on a Sunday night, and then it moved to a game, like a family game. And my friend that JT is the father. He hates games, board games, hates it. But Sunday night, he's just like, okay, we're playing games, and because his kids love it.
Yeah. And what a great way to connect. You're doing something, playing a game together. And by the by, happen to be talking and sharing and chatting, while you're playing games. It's a lovely way to connect. It really is. I miss those days too when we in all the years I've been away, often would have like game nights or board game nights with friends, like just for fun, that's what you do. So yeah, so great.
It's a wonderful thing, isn't it, to do those games and to have those conversations, because so much comes up in those moments. If you sat down with your teenager or child or whatever age, not as much comes out as if you're in a more casual kind of situation like playing games. Is that fair to say for you guys too? Well, I've noticed it with my 6-year-old.
Yes.
Yeah.
And it's not, in the spotlight. Then it's not like they're being grilled. You're just sharing and chatting, right? So it's a different. It's like a triangulation, right? There's sort of, parents and siblings, and kid or kids, and then the game. So there's sort of this triangulation of something to be doing outside of just talking, and you may be feeling awkward because it's not cool to talk to parents anymore.
One of the things that I like about games too is that, you can talk about the characters. What would this character do in this situation, or this character do in that situation? And it really helps to sort of have those light bulb moments. It's a beautiful thing to sort of go down that exploring stage, especially. I think it's great for imagination and also communication, as we've mentioned several times now. Speaking of communication, my daughter goes to a school where they have different kinds of support, particularly for the kids who sort of might be falling between the cracks. And I'm curious to know, Sally, what's your experience with how you're working currently? Are you working more with the kids between the cracks or more at the other end of the spectrum?
Yeah, great question. Thanks, Sarah. I do have a couple of kiddos who are those sort of at-risk kids who have struggled, academically or socially. But my main focus is working with what I term as high achieving teens. And what does that mean? It's sort of the good kids who, are doing well. They may not be the top kids, but they're doing well at school. They do what, really reliable sort of kids who are getting by, maybe feel a bit challenged here and there. And oftentimes, I don't know about you, but so many times I felt over the years, and I wished that somebody could have done it for me back in the day as well, is you just want to hand them a big bucket of confidence and go, like, here you go, like, just take this and you'll be fine. And unfortunately it's not that easy, but there are many things that we can do to structure things such that they get some, quick and easy wins, build up their own self-confidence, and then start taking on, slightly more challenging things over time. But communication is a big one. And for parents, and educators out there, it's really about being mindful of asking open-ended questions. So, and it's actually the same for the kids. It's what I always encourage them to do as well, to be practicing their listening. So we're not just listening to respond, like you're saying something, oh, let me think about what I'm going to say back. It just actually... exactly. Just listening, active listening, and practicing that with their friends, and becoming a good listener. But for parents, it's really important that we become good listeners and suspend judgment, because there's always going to be judgment and expectations there, and we need to get really clear. And oftentimes it's like the glasses, right? The judgments and expectations that are there, it's like a filter but we've forgotten that it's there, so we don't see it anymore. It's just there. And so we're looking at our kids through the lens of expectations, and not realizing. And so therefore, if those expectations aren't being met, judgments arise. And it just gets in the way of the communication and the connection that we want to build, because, then the kids are feeling judged. So they're backing away further and further each time. And if we can suspend our judgment and be the people who will be there, find ways to let our kids know that we will be there no matter what, that they can come to us, as the adults in the room, building, that level of rapport with my clients takes a little bit of time, because sometimes they don't know me at all, but that, you want to know that they want to know that you're on their team, and whilst it's the job of a coach, like if they're playing basketball, the coach needs to tell them how they should be playing the game and give them some judgment. Like, Sarah, you did great today. Neil, I loved your collaboration in the team, passing, whatever. They're giving that sort of judgment specific to the skills of the game, but not to the not to the kid, right? So they're not judging the kid unless because sometimes coach has to call it on behaviors and things like that, but it's usually around the skills of the game. So we can also do that too with the kids, is give them feedback on the things that they're doing well, you know, and what you appreciate about them, and making an effort to, because as human beings, we're often quite negative and we don't realize that, but we go to the negative very easily. So focusing back on what can I give as feedback that's positive, that's really uplifting, now that we're on the uplift show, you know, and really, you know, giving that affirmations of on the things, even if it's one small thing. Even the naughtiest kid in the class, I could always find something to, you know, to affirm and acknowledge, because you know, rather than always hammering on the negatives, because you're just going to lose them and they'll shut down as well.
Yes, absolutely. I also, as a parent or an adult, I believe that as to build a rapport, we need to show vulnerability and own up to our children, our aunts, our nephews, our nieces, and the children in it, and own up that yes, we've made the same mistakes, and it needs to be age appropriate. You need to be able to tell a 12-year-old that, yeah, I fell in love, and yeah, it hurt, and you don't need to go into any of the gory details, but they need to know that you're a part of it, and so it helps build that. And it's, to me, it's all age appropriate, how you respond with them.
Totally. Yeah, so great. It is
one of the things that I love doing, whether it's with my daughter or other kids, is, you know, saying, hey, you did a great job at X, Y, or Z. Are you proud of yourself? And really the look on their face, that they light up and you can just see them swelling with joy, like, you really care? Actually, I am proud of myself because I did X, Y, and Z. And it's just a wonderful way to see them light up. And what I've noticed is that when you do that, then they actually start doing that with their friends too. Like, you did a really good job, you know, somebody picked on you, or you did a really good job, you spelt that word, or whatever it was. That helps to support them to communicate with others, and it's a win-win-win for everybody. Sally, I'm sure you've seen that several times before. How would you expand upon that?
Yeah, so it's always interesting, because if we ask questions, you know, in those moments when things perhaps don't go the way that we would hope, you know, if you say to kids, what were you thinking? They're probably going to say nothing, or I wasn't, you know, and it's actually it's not intended to wind the adults in the room up, whether it's the parents or the teachers. It's not intended to wind you up. It's really true. Like, they weren't thinking, and they probably didn't think of anything. They just did that thing because they don't have their prefrontal cortex fully developed yet. They haven't got the logical thinking. They're very emotional driven. You know, they just react to things the way that they react to things. And it really takes them a little time and a lot of support and encouragement to learn how to take a breath before, you know, and to pause, or to think about what's going to come out of their mouth, or what they're, you know, going to do next before their hand flies out and punches their friend or whatever, you know. So,
but he deserved it.
Right. He started it. And she said, yeah. But they don't have that rationality, you know, and asking a really young person to think about others is not, it's kind of like an alien concept to them. You know, they're not able to really think about others. They're more about, you know, what's happening for them and their immediate, you know, needs. So, yeah, so that's a really big thing to keep in mind. So, yeah, and bringing curiosity. I was interviewing some heads of schools recently who are heads of schools, big schools in Europe, you know, reached out and sort of had interviewed them about future ready skills, something called future ready skills, but also this, you know, what they're seeing from their platforms. You know, they obviously work from very large educational platforms, and they were kind enough to spend a little bit of time chatting with me about that. And, you know, the real theme is, as I was saying before, is to bring curiosity. And we want to be encouraging our kiddos to bring curiosity. And I don't just mean like about looking up stuff on Google. It's about being curious about the world, being curious about other people, being curious about, you know, why are things the way they are, and suspending judgment. So, if we can suspend that judgment, just be open and be curious and have those conversations. And when they say why, don't just try and give them an answer. Ask them, well, why do you think? And
what do you think? One of my favorite questions.
Right? Have you thought about, instead of giving them an answer, what about this as a potential possibility? What do you think about that? We tend to be, the adults in Chinese, the word for teacher is Lao Shi, which means old master. So, I'm the keeper of knowledge and I shall impart my knowledge to you. That's been the traditional way of education for a long time, but it's shifting. The good schools, the good educators, the front runners are shifting things now. And it's becoming about building competencies, the skills and the skill sets that we need to develop over time. So, public speaking, at school for a 5-year-old, what does that look like? It means being able to say, share their ideas to the teacher or in front of the class, being willing to speak up, and then it looks very different for a 10-year-old and then a 15-year-old and obviously a 25-year-old in a working environment. So but it's a skill set that builds up over time. There's a whole continuum. So we need to look at where we are on the continuum. It's not about right or wrong anymore. We've got to move beyond that. It's about, doing what works, but also noticing the skills continuum. Where am I? What do I need to keep improving? And, and acknowledging where, all of the skills that I've got to be where I am now. So interestingly enough, I asked one of my clients recently, about her day at school. I said, what went well? And she said, this and that. And I stayed away from this other girl who's been harassing her a bit, I just did this and I did that. Just really acknowledged her for all those things. And then I said, what do you think you could do better next time? Is there anything that happened, that you could do differently next time? And she said, I think I did good today. And she wasn't able to look because in her map of the world, owning up to doing something differently or doing something, in a better way next time, having reflected, meant that she did something bad or wrong. So there's a whole world of conversation there for us to have around, growth and development and what that looks like, way beyond right and wrong. Yeah.
So I'm getting curious, Sally. In the green room, we talked that you had written or are working on a book.
Aha. Yes. Thank you, Neil, for that little segue. So I was a co-author of a book earlier this year. It's called Voices of Impact, and it's volume 2. Recently, volume 3 has also been published. So it was, as you would very well know, Neil, an amazing experience to become an author. And in these Voices of Impact, we're all sharing something of our own journey, how we've overcome some sort of adversity or challenges in our own lives to come to be doing what we're doing. So my story of adversity is having been abused, the worst kind of abuse that you can imagine for a little girl when I was quite young. And obviously that impacted my understanding of the world for a very long time until I was able to get older and then start on my own journey of figuring things out. And it really, one of the things that it impacted was trust, being able to trust others. It was a relative, not immediate family, but a relative, and who was someone who was trusted to be, around our family. So that was a tough one. And so when that happens, how do you have to be in the world? You've got to be strong. You've got to be smart. You've got to be capable, and because you've got to be able to take care of yourself because you can't trust anybody, right? And so I started realizing as I went through my teenage years, I was fortunate enough to be able to I had a pony when I was young. And then as I got a bit older and a bit more competitive, I was able to graduate to what we call a Galloway, like a medium-sized horse. And I really got into pony clubbing and, the regional showing and that sort of thing. And, earned myself some champion riders, champion in dressage, was able to compete at state level for dressage, representing my pony club zone. Like I loved it, and it kept me very grounded. through what could have otherwise been quite tumultuous teenage years. So that was my version of being a high achiever. I was also pretty strong academically, not the best, not the smartest in the class, but up there with the top kids. So and fortunately I had parents who were willing to allow me to take on, to keep writing and keep competing even into high school, because I promised them if they would let me do that, then I would manage my schoolwork. So that was the deal that we had. And I'm very grateful that they were able to support me in that way and not make me give up that one thing that I was so passionate about. And if you'd have asked me, as a teenager, what do you want to be? And, I shared all this in my chapter. What do you want to be when you grow up? I would have told you, I want to go to the Olympics and ride dressage one day. That was my big thing back then.
Yeah.
And so unfortunately, when I went away to university, I had to sell my horse, and, I thought that, that was all over, packed up all my trophies and my sashes and everything else and put them on a shelf in my parents' garage, and off I went to university and to, move into sort of, gradually into adult life and all that. So I always assumed that my Olympic dream was over, not to ever even realize that it might be possible to show up in another way. So while I was working in, there's Cindy. Hey, Cindy. Working in Beijing, it was a friend of a friend, strange situation. I actually got invited to work as an interpreter and story fixer for the Australian television network, Network 7, covering the Beijing Olympics. So I got to go to the Olympics. Like, I didn't know that my Olympic dream would come true just in another way. Right? So, yeah. So it's all about being... I love that. Right.
There's so many different ways that we can journey and to find our path, and like perfect example here. Yeah. What is one of those memories then from that experience that you'd like to share with us?
Oh, so many. It was incredible being right there at that moment with all of the top athletes in the world, all of the, TV personalities. Not that I actually knew many of the Australian TV personalities, because I'd been in China 8 years at that point. And I didn't know who they were. So I was, my cameraman was laughing at me going, how do you not know these people? I'm going, well, they're not famous in China, Meanwhile, I had been on Chinese television and I had a pretty big audience as well. So people are like, don't they know who you are? And I'm going, no, they don't. So that was kind of funny as well. But it was just such an amazing opportunity. But the interesting thing to share is that I'd had a big story. I mean, teaching Chinese in China is kind of it's a bit of a claim to fame. But I had this big fat story that my Chinese isn't good enough. My Chinese isn't good enough. So I'd never speak up very much other than in school, doing the school things, not a problem, and obviously teaching my kids and that sort of thing. But I didn't want to speak up in public. And it really took me taking on doing a personal breakthrough program in China with Chinese, participants. And then took me a few weeks, and they were all curious about, like, who's this whitey in the corner? Like, who's sitting there? What's she doing here, kind of thing. And then eventually I stood up one day and I said, look, I have this, what we would call in coaching a limiting belief. Like, I have this story that my Chinese isn't good enough, and, and therefore I just don't speak up. And of course they all laughed, because there I was speaking in Chinese to tell them this in the first place. So, it was just this real paradoxical situation, but a total limiting belief. And it really took something for me to give up that limiting belief in order to be able to say yes to that opportunity. There's no way, even just, a year or two before the Olympics, I would have, if somebody had said, would you like to do this? I'd be like, oh, no, thanks for the opportunity, but no, my Chinese isn't good enough. I really would have been like that. And then, so fortunately I had been through this experience to know that I could, acknowledge that little fear and limiting belief that kind of rides around on the shoulder sometimes and goes, but, and you're like, shut up, get out of the way. I'm doing this, So thanks for sharing. Go away. So it really is so powerful, right? And, just shifting, even as a teacher, getting to understand that the kids in my class aren't just pimply annoying, young people, you know, who are at a certain stage of their life, they are actually our future leaders. And you know, and the kids that I work with in coaching, they're our future leaders. And it doesn't matter whether they become, you know, whatever level that they work at and whatever they do in the future, they are the future leaders. You can be a leader in your family as, you know, as a housewife. You can be a leader of your country as the president or the prime minister. It's the same principles, just on a different scale, right? So yeah, and we need our kids to understand that they can be leaders in their lives now as well, while still following the rules, while still, you know, doing all the things that are expected of them at school and at home, but they can take leadership in their lives too. And that is a massive shift. It also requires giving up some of those stories and limiting beliefs that we have about ourselves and kind of shifting them to the side and then doing things anyway. Yeah.
So is that one of those things that go, Neil?
I just looked at the clock and I'm going, oh my goodness, how is this possible? Sally, you're going to be running a program. You've run programs in the past, but what is it that you're going to be offering in the future for teens and parents?
Yeah, so I actually have what I call my signature system. So I have a 3-month program for kiddos based around communication, getting them to know their values and their strengths, and how they operate, so that they can be more responsible for the way that they work and the way that they like to work. So it's a 3-month program, and if any of my the teens want to extend, the second tier is a leadership program. So first of all, we do the stuff dealing with I, me, my, and mine, and my world, and then we work, step out into looking at them in, as a contributing member of home, school, society, that sort of thing. So, and how they can be, having built the foundation of some communication skills and understandings of how they work, then what they're doing outside of themselves. So it really, it's a really great program. I'm so excited. I'm also looking at developing those for schools. So instead of just one-to-one, it'll be available in schools soon too. But in terms of the kids, that's one thing. But it's really hard if you know kids to be developing themselves. Hello there, Dre McLaughlin. So developing themselves and making some breakthroughs and some headway and trying to change the way that they're doing things without the parents understanding what's happening. So we want to work with the parents as well, because as we've been talking about a lot in the last hour, it's about how we're being that really influences how our kids can be as well. So if our cup is full, it's really hard to be able to bring the sort of the generosity and the grace to situations when our kids are trying to press the buttons, and we're really full up and it's all happening. And so it's really important to work with the parents as well, and just have them being able to understand more effective ways of communicating and connecting with the kids.
I keep hitting the wrong button. The camera is right in front of the screen, and I'm like,
There we go.
Yeah. So
thank you.
Before we start to really wrap it up, I'd love to share with our audience that if you're listening to this on replay, you're seeing it live, and you're seeing it on Facebook, we'd really love your support if you could jump on our YouTube channel. It has been the neglected and unloved child that we've been so focused on Facebook that we have this beautiful YouTube channel. So if you could go and join it, we would appreciate it. And you can go to join.uplift.show. It just needs a little love, and we would truly appreciate just a little love. So thank you in advance if you're drawn to, and if you don't want to, no worries. We'll still see you on Facebook. We will see you. You will hear us on replay in the podcast, iTunes, iHeartRadio, the usual programs.
Absolutely. Yeah, we would love you to subscribe and have more fun with us. Oh, I think there's been a lot of takeaways from today's show. Guys, Neil and I are both playing producer and swapping buttons around. My turn. We would love to know what your takeaways have been. You know, how maybe you choose to communicate differently with your teenager or even yourself. One of my personal takeaways is knowing where my child is at and how I can best support them with their development is one of those things that I get the opportunity to choose to do. Absolutely agree with you, Cindy. What an amazing program that Cindy has. And we would love to know what your takeaways are. So please drop us a comment in, or if you've got any questions, I'm sure Sally would love to get back to you. All the details have been coming across the screen all the show, and I'm sure they're going to pop up again before we go. But before we go, final words, guys. How would you like to end the show? What are your takeaways?
I would like to invite everyone to connect with me on Facebook. I do a lot of sharing there. I just find it's really convenient way of communicating and sharing out ideas and that sort of thing. So also email. The email's been there available, but yeah, connect on Facebook or just DM me any questions. Look out for High Achieving Teens parent group coming soon on Facebook as well. So yeah, lots of different ways to keep connected. So yeah, and thank you too as well. I love your show. I am a subscriber on YouTube, and yes, there's been so many amazing guests that you've had. I love these conversations, and they are uplifting. Because it's not all doom and gloom. A lot of our teens these days are facing so much stress and worry. They get a bit shut down, because there's so much focus, on the environment and this and that and all this, the scariness of the future. What we need to be doing is encourage them to understand that there is always new thinking that comes online, right? And they'll be the ones bringing the new thinking to solve all the problems that we're leaving for them. So, so there will always be that evolution of new ways of doing things, new thinking coming in, such that we can evolve ourselves as human beings, but the world that they're living into as well. And there's a lot of hope and a lot of amazing opportunities to be contributing to the future. So yeah, Sarah, your little one has an amazing future to live into. It's not all doom and gloom. So that's where we want to be encouraging them to look. Yeah.
Oh, I love that.
Thank you,
I love
Cindy.
that Cindy's added this amazing comment here. How good is it to be bilingual? Actually, let us know if you do speak more than one language. Let us know. Neil?
I just want to leave people with follow your dreams. Sally had a dream of being in the Olympics. Well, she was at the Olympics and she was part of the Olympics. It just may not have been to her original vision, but she made it. So follow your dreams. Take chances, maybe not move across to China or whatever, but live and fully embrace the life that you want to live and know that you're loved. And with that, I'll let Sarah take it away.
Oh, you guys are loved. We love you. We appreciate every single one of you. Sally, you've been amazing. Thank you so much for sharing your story with Neil and I and everybody watching, whether that be live in replay. And guys, whether you're watching live or in replay, we appreciate you too. I would like to finish by just saying, share your dream with others. Don't just hold it back. Let other people know that you're journeying in one direction or another, whether it's learning a new language or you're learning how to read or write or whatever that is. Share that with people so you can all be on the same page. It's a beautiful thing that we can do to share the gift of knowledge and support with each other. So until next time we speak, go and support each other. Go have amazing, uplifting conversations. And we'll see you soon on Uplift. Take care.
Take care.